Claire's hand froze on the door handle. Through the thin wood, she heard her sister's voice, low and urgent, and then Daniel's voice answering in the same hushed tone. Something about the way they spoke made her chest tighten before she even understood the words. She was standing in the hallway of the venue, holding a box of wedding favors, only 11 days before her wedding, and every instinct in her body told her to stay perfectly still and listen. Claire Bennett was 29 years old, a pediatric nurse who had spent the last 6 years caring for other people's children while quietly hoping for a family of her own one day. She was steady, calm under pressure, the kind of person coworkers called when a situation turned chaotic in the hospital ward. But nothing in her training had prepared her for what she was about to hear on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, in a rented banquet hall smelling of fresh paint and lilies. She had arrived early to drop off the favors before her shift started. The wedding coordinator had told her Daniel might already be there checking on the seating arrangement. Claire had smiled at the thought of surprising him, of sharing a quiet moment together before the wedding madness swallowed them whole again. Instead, she found herself standing outside a small side room, her heart pounding, listening to a conversation that was not meant for her ears. "She still doesn't know anything," Melissa said. "You need to relax." "I am relaxed," Daniel answered, though his voice did not sound relaxed at all. It sounded tight, almost breathless. "It's just after Saturday I keep thinking, what if someone saw us?" "Nobody saw us. Stop being paranoid." Claire's fingers tightened around the box in her hands. Her sister, her fiancé, the two people she trusted most in the world outside of her parents, standing in a room together discussing something they clearly did not want her to know. She told herself there had to be an explanation. Maybe they were planning a surprise. Maybe it was about the wedding gift, something secret and sweet that she was not supposed to find out about yet. She wanted so badly to believe that. But then Melissa spoke again, and the words landed like a blow to the chest. "We just need to get through the wedding," Melissa said. "After that, we can figure out what to actually do." Claire did not move. She did not breathe. The box of favors trembled slightly in her hands, small silver ribbons catching the light from the hallway window. She wanted to open the door. She wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to shatter whatever this was before it went any further. But something inside her, some quiet and steady part of her nursing instinct, told her to wait, to listen, to understand exactly what she was dealing with before she reacted. So she stayed there, silent, as the two people she loved most continued speaking in low voices about secrets they thought were safe. She caught fragments. A hotel. A weekend trip Melissa was supposed to have spent visiting a friend in another city. Daniel's business conference that had somehow overlapped with the same weekend. Pieces of a puzzle Claire had never thought to question, because she never had a reason to doubt either of them. When she finally forced herself to step back from the door, her legs felt unsteady, as if the floor beneath her had tilted. She walked quickly toward the exit, the box of favors still clutched against her chest, and did not stop until she reached her car in the parking lot. She sat behind the wheel for several minutes without turning the key, staring straight ahead at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. 3 years? She had been with Daniel for 3 years. She remembered the night he proposed, on a rooftop overlooking the city, string lights glowing above them, his hands trembling as he opened the small velvet box. She remembered thinking that she had never felt so certain of anything in her life. And Melissa, her younger sister by 4 years, had cried tears of joy that night, had hugged Claire so tightly that Claire could barely breathe, had whispered that she was so happy her big sister had found someone who truly deserved her. Now those same hands, the ones that had wiped away happy tears at Claire's engagement, belonged to a woman who had apparently been keeping something from her for months. Claire finally started the car and drove home in a fog. She did not remember most of the drive. She parked outside her apartment building and sat there again, this time letting herself cry quiet tears that came without sobbing, without dramatic gasps, just steady drops rolling down her cheeks as the reality of what she had heard settled deeper into her bones. She thought back over the past few months, searching her memory for signs she might have missed. There had been small things, she realized now, things she had brushed aside because she trusted the people involved too much to imagine anything wrong. Daniel had been distracted lately, checking his phone more often, sometimes stepping outside to take calls he said were about work. Melissa had been unusually eager to help with wedding planning, offering to run errands with Daniel, insisting she did not mind spending an afternoon with him picking out flowers or tasting cake samples, while Claire was busy at the hospital. At the time, Claire had felt grateful. She had told her friends how lucky she was to have a sister who cared so much, a fiancé who got along so well with her family that the two of them could handle small tasks together without any tension. She remembered saying those words out loud, proud of how close-knit her little circle seemed to be. The memory now felt like a cruel joke. She thought about calling her mother but stopped herself. What would she even say? That she had overheard a conversation, one that could still, in theory, mean something entirely different from what her mind was racing toward. She needed more than fragments. She needed to know the truth, the whole truth, before she let herself believe the worst. That evening Daniel called her, his voice warm and normal, asking how her day had gone, mentioning that he had stopped by the venue earlier to check on the table arrangements. He did not mention Melissa. He did not mention anything unusual at all. Claire sat on her couch, phone pressed to her ear, and forced her voice to sound just as normal as his. "Good," she said. "Busy day at the hospital. How about you?" "Same old," he said. "Just trying to make sure everything is perfect for you on the big day." She almost laughed at the words, though there was nothing funny about them. Perfect. He wanted everything to be perfect while he stood in a room with her sister discussing something they needed to hide until after the wedding. She swallowed the bitterness rising in her throat and kept the conversation light, asking about his day, listening to him describe a minor problem at his architecture firm, nodding along even though he could not see her. When the call ended, Claire sat in silence for a long time, staring at her phone screen until it dimmed and went dark. She thought about her sister, about the years they had shared growing up in the same house, the whispered secrets under blankets during sleepovers, the way Melissa used to look up to her, follow her around, want to be exactly like her. Somewhere along the way, had that admiration curdled into something else? Had Melissa always wanted what Claire had, only never found the courage or opportunity to take it until now? Claire did not know the answer, and not knowing was its own kind of torment. The next morning, she went to work as usual, moving through her shift with the same competence and care she always brought to her patients, even as her mind kept drifting back to the hallway outside that small side room. A coworker named Priya, who had been Claire's closest friend since nursing school, noticed something was off during their lunch break. "You're quiet today," Priya said, unwrapping her sandwich in the break room. "Everything okay with the wedding stuff?" Claire hesitated. She trusted Priya completely, had confided in her through every difficult moment of the past several years, from breakups to family arguments to the stress of nursing school exams. If there was anyone she could tell, it was Priya. But saying the words out loud would make it real in a way that simply carrying the knowledge inside her chest had not yet forced her to confront. "I think something is wrong," Claire finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "With Daniel. And Melissa." Priya set down her sandwich immediately, giving Claire her full attention. "What do you mean?" Claire told her everything, the overheard conversation, the fragments about a hotel and a weekend trip, the way both of their voices had sounded when they thought no one was listening. Priya's expression shifted from confusion to concern to something closer to anger as Claire spoke, and by the time she finished, Priya had reached across the table and taken her hand. "You need to find out for certain," Priya said. "Before you do anything else, you can't confront them based on a few sentences you overheard through a door. You need proof, or you need to hear it directly from them." Claire nodded slowly, grateful for her friend's steady presence, for the way Priya's practical mind cut through the fog of emotion clouding her own thoughts. "I know," she said. "I just don't know how to do that without giving myself away." "We'll figure it out," Priya said, "together." That promise settled something in Claire, gave her a small foothold in a world that suddenly felt like it was tilting beneath her feet. She was not going to fall apart in front of everyone. She was not going to let Daniel or Melissa see even a flicker of what she now knew until she understood the full shape of their betrayal. She had built a career on staying calm during emergencies, on thinking clearly when everything around her was chaos. This was no different, she told herself, even though every part of her wanted to scream. Over the following days, Claire began to watch more carefully, though she made sure never to seem suspicious. She noticed the way Daniel's phone buzzed with messages he quickly silenced, sliding the device face down on the table whenever they sat together. She noticed how Melissa suddenly found reasons to avoid spending time alone with Claire, always claiming she was busy with work or errands whenever Claire suggested a sister's afternoon together, the kind of outing they used to enjoy at least twice a month. Small details that once meant nothing now carried enormous weight. A perfume Claire did not recognize lingering faintly on Daniel's jacket one evening. A receipt from a coffee shop across town, in a neighborhood Daniel had no reason to visit for work, tucked into his coat pocket. Claire found herself becoming an unwilling detective in her own life, piecing together evidence of a betrayal she still could not fully accept, even as the proof mounted around her. She thought about her parents, about how proud they had been when Daniel proposed, how her father had shaken his hand firmly and called him a good man, how her mother had already begun planning which family recipes to include in the wedding menu. She thought about the hundreds of dollars already spent on invitations, on the dress hanging in her closet, on deposits for the venue and the caterer and the band. She thought about the 200 guests who had already confirmed their attendance, people flying in from other states, relatives she had not seen in years making plans to celebrate what they believed would be the happiest day of her life. Claire realized, sitting alone in her apartment one night with the lights off and the city humming quietly outside her window, that she had a choice to make. She could confront Daniel and Melissa privately, demand answers, and quietly cancel the wedding before anyone else found out what had happened. It would be simpler, less painful in some ways. Fewer people would need to know the details of her humiliation. Or she could wait. She could gather everything she needed to know the full truth, and then decide, once and for all, exactly how she wanted the truth to come out. She did not make a decision that night, but something inside her had already begun to shift, a quiet resolve forming beneath the hurt, steady and unshakable, the same kind of resolve that had carried her through every difficult night shift, every emergency, every moment when the people around her needed someone who would not break down when it mattered most. She was not going to be the only one left standing in the wreckage of this betrayal. If Daniel and Melissa thought they could hide behind smiles and wedding toasts until it was too late for anyone to stop them, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Claire turned off her bedroom lamp that night, but she did not sleep. She lay awake in the darkness, replaying every word she had overheard, every small detail that now made painful sense, and somewhere in those long, quiet hours, the woman who had always been calm under pressure began planning something far more deliberate than simple confrontation. She was going to find out everything, and then she was going to decide, with full clarity and full control, exactly what justice would look like. The wedding was still 11 days away. Claire intended to use every single one of them. Priya arrived at Claire's apartment the next evening carrying a bag of takeout and a look of quiet determination on her face. She set the food down on the kitchen counter without a word and pulled Claire into a tight hug before either of them said anything about what had happened. When they finally sat down at the small kitchen table, containers of noodles and rice steaming between them, Priya got straight to the point. "Have you noticed anything else?" she asked. Claire nodded, pulling out her phone and scrolling to a note she had started keeping, a private list of small details that no longer felt small. "Daniel's been getting texts he doesn't want me to see. He used to leave his phone anywhere, on the couch, on the counter, never cared if I saw a notification pop up. Now he keeps it face down every time we're together. And last week he said he had a work trip to the coast, but when I asked about it later, he got the dates wrong. He said it was Thursday to Saturday, but earlier he'd told me Friday to Sunday." Priya frowned, leaning forward. "That's not nothing." "And Melissa," Claire continued, her voice lower now. "She used to text me constantly, Silly things, memes, updates on her day. Now I text her and she takes hours to respond, sometimes a whole day. When I asked if she wanted to get lunch this weekend, she said she was busy, but then I saw on her social media that she posted a photo from a cafe I know is only a few blocks from Daniel's office. Priya set down her fork. Okay, so we know something is happening. The question is how far you want to go to find out exactly what, and how you want to handle it once you know. Claire had thought about little else for the past 2 days. Between shifts at the hospital, during her commute in the quiet hours before sleep, her mind kept circling back to the same question. She could confront them now, demand the truth, and let the wedding collapse quietly, privately, with only her closest family knowing the real reason behind the cancellation. Or she could wait, gather more information, and decide exactly how and when the truth would come out. I keep thinking about all those people, Claire said. 200 guests. My grandmother is flying in from 3 states away. Daniel's parents have already paid for half the catering. If I just quietly call it off now, everyone will ask questions, and I'll either have to lie to protect Daniel and Melissa, or tell a version of the truth that makes it seem smaller than it is. I don't want to protect them. Not after this. So what are you thinking? Priya asked carefully. Claire took a slow breath. The idea had been forming in the back of her mind for 2 days now, growing more solid each time she turned it over, examining it from every angle the way she examined a patient's symptoms before settling on a diagnosis. I want to know everything, she said. I want proof, real proof, not just fragments of a conversation I overheard through a door. And then I want to decide, with a clear head, exactly what I'm going to do about it. Priya studied her friend's face for a long moment. You're not talking about confronting them privately, are you? Claire shook her head slowly. I haven't decided anything for certain, but I'm not ruling it out. I want options. Right now I don't have any. Right now I just have a broken heart and a bad feeling in my stomach. Over the next several days, Claire moved through her life with a strange, deliberate calm that surprised even herself. At the hospital, she remained the same steady, capable nurse her colleagues relied on, soothing frightened children, reassuring anxious parents, catching small details in charts that other nurses sometimes missed. Nobody there knew that beneath her composed exterior, her entire personal world was quietly collapsing. At home, she began paying closer attention to the small rhythms of Daniel's life, the patterns she had never had reason to question before. She noticed he left for his morning run at the same time every day, phone tucked into an armband, and one morning, after he had already left the apartment they were slowly starting to share for wedding planning purposes even though Claire still kept her own place, she found his laptop open on the kitchen table, still logged into his email. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the screen, torn between the part of her that still wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, and the part of her that already knew there was not. Her hand hovered over the trackpad. She thought about privacy, about trust, about the version of herself from 2 weeks ago who would never have considered looking through someone else's messages. That version of herself no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone standing in a kitchen at 7 in the morning, staring at evidence of her own life falling apart, trying to decide whether looking closer would help her or destroy her further. She scrolled through the inbox quickly, scanning subject lines, searching for anything unusual among the ordinary clutter of work emails and shipping confirmations. Nothing jumped out immediately. She almost gave up, almost closed the laptop and walked away, telling herself this was not who she wanted to be. But then she noticed a folder labeled simply with a single letter, tucked away beneath the primary inbox, easy to overlook unless someone was looking specifically for something out of place. Inside were messages between Daniel and an email address she did not recognize at first, until she realized with a jolt that it belonged to Melissa. Not the personal email Claire knew, the one Melissa used for everything from online shopping to family group chats, but a separate account, one clearly created for a single purpose. Claire's hands trembled as she opened the first message. The words on the screen confirmed everything she had feared and more. There were plans mentioned, meeting times, apologies for texts left unanswered too long, expressions of feelings that should never have existed between a man and his fiancée's sister. She forced herself to keep reading, her stomach twisting with every line, until she reached a message from just over a month earlier that made the room around her seem to tilt sideways. Melissa had written that she felt guilty, that she loved her sister and hated what they were doing, but that she could not stop herself from wanting Daniel anyway. Daniel had responded that he felt the same conflict, that he cared about Claire, that he never meant for any of this to happen, but that what he felt for Melissa was different, stronger, something he could not simply walk away from. And yet neither of them had walked away from Claire either. Neither of them had confessed. Neither of them had called off the wedding, ended the engagement, told her the truth so she could make her own choices with full knowledge of what was happening in her life. Instead, they had continued the deception, continued planning a wedding that Daniel apparently no longer wanted for the reasons everyone believed, continued smiling at family dinners and taking photos for wedding invitations while carrying on their secret behind Claire's back. She took photographs of every message with her own phone, her hands steady now, the earlier trembling replaced by something colder, more focused. She was no longer the heartbroken woman standing in her kitchen. She was becoming someone else entirely, someone gathering evidence with clear purpose, someone building a case the way a detective builds a case, methodical and unshakable. When she finished, she closed the laptop exactly as she had found it and left the apartment for her shift, driving through the early morning traffic with a strange sense of clarity settling over her. She had her proof now, real, undeniable proof. The question was no longer whether her fiancé and her sister had betrayed her. The question was what she was going to do with what she now knew. She called Priya during her lunch break and told her everything. "I have screenshots of everything," Claire said, sitting alone in her car in the hospital parking garage, phone pressed to her ear. Messages going back months. They talk about a hotel, about feeling guilty, about not being able to stop, it's all there. Priya was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. "How are you feeling?" Claire considered the question honestly before answering. "I don't even know anymore. Angry, sad, but also strangely calm, like I finally understand what I'm dealing with and now I just need to figure out what to do about it." "Have you thought more about confronting them?" Priya asked. Claire had thought about little else. Every version of a private confrontation played out the same way in her mind. She would corner Daniel or Melissa or both of them together and demand answers, and there would be tears and excuses, and perhaps even attempts to twist the story into something more sympathetic than it truly was. She could already imagine Melissa crying, saying she never meant for it to happen, that she had been struggling with feelings she could not control. She could already imagine Daniel promising it meant nothing, that he still loved Claire, that he had made a terrible mistake he deeply regretted. And in the end, if she confronted them privately, the wedding would simply be canceled. A quiet, private disaster, one that Claire alone would have to explain to friends and family without necessarily revealing the full truth, unless she chose to. Daniel and Melissa would have the chance to control the narrative, to soften the story, to protect their own reputations, while Claire carried the weight of a broken engagement, with only partial understanding among the people who loved her. "I don't want them to control how this ends," Claire finally said. "I don't want to give them the chance to make this smaller than it is, to make excuses to my parents, to twist the story into something they can survive without real consequences. I want everyone who believes this wedding is real to know exactly what it actually is." "You're talking about the wedding day," Priya said slowly, understanding dawning in her voice. "I'm talking about letting everyone hear the truth together at once, with no room for excuses or softened explanations," Claire said. "I want 200 people to know exactly who Daniel and Melissa really are, at the exact moment they think they've gotten away with it." The plan that began forming in Claire's mind over the following days was not born from cruelty, though she knew some people might see it that way. It was born from something deeper, a need for the truth to exist fully and completely in the open, witnessed by everyone who mattered, so that no one could later claim they did not understand what had really happened. She had spent her entire adult life caring for others, absorbing the emotional weight of every difficult situation quietly, professionally, without complaint. This time she was not going to absorb the pain silently. This time, the truth would be seen by everyone. She continued attending wedding planning meetings with Daniel, continued smiling for photographs, continued speaking with Melissa about maid of honor duties as though nothing had changed between them. It required an enormous act of self-control, a performance more demanding than anything she had ever done in her professional life. But Claire found herself capable of it, driven by the clarity of her purpose. At night, alone in her apartment, she organized everything she had gathered, the photographs of messages, the timeline of suspicious behavior. A voice memo she had managed to record on a second visit to the venue, catching another fragment of conversation between Daniel and Melissa that confirmed everything she already knew. She built a folder, carefully labeled, backed up in multiple places, ready to be used exactly when she decided the moment was right. Priya helped her think through every detail, playing devil's advocate, asking hard questions Claire needed to consider. What if her parents were furious with her for waiting so long to reveal the truth? What if Daniel or Melissa tried to deny everything even in front of the evidence? What if the entire plan backfired and left Claire looking cruel instead of wronged? Claire turned these questions over carefully, refusing to move forward until she felt certain of her answers. She was not doing this out of cruelty. She was doing this because she deserved to reclaim the truth from the two people who had tried to steal it from her, who had planned to let her stand at an altar and promise forever to a man who had already given part of himself to someone else, who had let her sister smile beside her as maid of honor while secretly betraying the very foundation of their relationship. 10 days remained until the wedding when Claire made her final decision. She was not going to confront Daniel and Melissa privately. She was not going to let them control the story, soften the truth, or escape the consequences of their choices behind closed doors. She was going to let the truth arrive exactly when everyone believed the celebration was reaching its most joyful moment, in front of every single person who had gathered to witness a love that had never truly been what it appeared to be. She began, quietly and carefully, to plan exactly how that moment would unfold. The following weekend, Claire drove to her childhood home under the pretense of helping her mother finalize seating arrangements for the reception. The house looked exactly as it always had, warm and familiar, filled with photographs spanning decades of family milestones. Claire paused in the hallway before reaching the kitchen, staring at a framed picture of herself and Melissa as children, arms wrapped around each other on a beach somewhere, both of them missing teeth and laughing at something outside the frame. She wondered, standing there, exactly when the sister in that photograph had begun turning into someone capable of what she now knew. Her mother, Linda, was seated at the kitchen table surrounded by place cards and a printed guest list, humming softly to herself as she worked. She looked up when Claire entered, her face brightening immediately. "There's my girl," Linda said. "Come sit. I need your opinion on the head table arrangement." Claire sat down across from her mother, forcing a smile onto her face, the same performance she had been giving for over a week now. They worked through the seating chart together, discussing which relatives should sit near each other and which should be kept at a careful distance due to old family disagreements that had nothing to do with the wedding itself. Claire found herself grateful for the mundane distraction, for the simple comfort of sitting in her mother's kitchen, discussing something as ordinary as place settings. "Have you talked to Melissa about her toast?" Linda asked, not looking up from the guest list. "She mentioned she's been working on it for weeks." Claire's hand tightened slightly around her pen. "No," she said carefully, "I haven't asked her about it." "I'm sure it will be beautiful," Linda said. "You two have always been so close. I remember when she was little, she used to follow you everywhere, wanted to do everything exactly the way you did it." Claire nodded, unable to trust her voice for a moment. Her mother had no idea how painfully accurate those words had become, how Melissa's childhood habit of wanting everything Claire had seemed to have followed her into adulthood in the most devastating way imaginable. Claire cleared her throat and steered the conversation back toward the seating chart, unwilling to let her composure slip in front of her mother before she was ready to reveal anything. Later that afternoon, as Claire prepared to leave, her father, Walter, stopped her in the driveway, his expression thoughtful. Walter had always been a quiet man, not given to long conversations, but he had a way of noticing things others missed. "Everything all right with you, sweetheart?" he asked, leaning against her car door. "You've seemed distracted the past couple of weeks." Claire hesitated, caught off guard by how easily her father had noticed something even her own mother had missed. She considered, for just a moment, telling him everything right there in the driveway. But she stopped herself, reminding herself of the plan she had spent days carefully building, the plan that required patience and precise timing to succeed the way she needed it to. "Just wedding stress," she said instead. "There's a lot to manage." Walter studied her for a long moment, the way he used to when she was a teenager and he could tell she was hiding something. "You know you can always talk to me," he said. "Whatever it is." "I know, Dad," Claire said, hugging him tightly before climbing into her car. "I love you." She drove away with tears threatening at the edges of her eyes, guilt mixing uncomfortably with her resolve. Her family trusted her completely, believed in the happiness she had always presented to them, and soon that happiness was going to shatter in front of everyone they knew. She reminded herself, gripping the steering wheel tightly, that she was not the one responsible for the coming disaster. Daniel and Melissa had built this collapse with their own choices. She was simply choosing not to hide it any longer. That evening, Priya came over again, this time bringing a notebook filled with careful notes from their previous conversations. They sat together at Claire's kitchen table, mapping out exactly what the coming days needed to look like. "You need corroboration," Priya said, tapping her pen against the notebook. "Not just the messages you found. Someone who can confirm what they saw in case Daniel or Melissa try to claim the messages were taken out of context or misunderstood." Claire had already considered this. She thought of Rosa, a friend from nursing school who had also become close with Melissa over the years through family gatherings and holiday parties. Rosa had mentioned once, in passing, seeing Daniel's car parked outside a restaurant downtown on an evening he had told Claire he was working late. At the time, Claire had assumed there was a simple explanation and had not thought much of it. Now, the memory took on new significance. Claire called Rosa the next day, her stomach tight with nerves as the phone rang. When Rosa picked up, Claire explained, carefully and without excessive detail, that she needed to ask about something she had mentioned a while back. "You said you saw Daniel's car outside that restaurant downtown," Claire said, "a few months ago. Do you remember when exactly that was?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Claire could sense Rosa's hesitation, the realization dawning that this question was not casual. "It was in the spring," Rosa said slowly. "I remember because I was meeting my cousin for her birthday dinner. Claire, is everything okay?" Claire took a steadying breath before answering honestly. "I found out Daniel and Melissa have been seeing each other, behind my back, for months." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds before Rosa spoke again, her voice filled with genuine shock and sympathy. "Claire, I am so sorry. I had no idea. If I had thought for even a second that something was happening, I would have told you immediately." "I know," Claire said. "I'm not upset with you. I just need to understand the full timeline of what's been happening. Would you be willing to tell me exactly what you remember about that night? The restaurant, who you saw, anything at all?" Rosa agreed without hesitation, describing in detail how she had seen Daniel's distinctive car parked outside a small Italian restaurant known for its quiet, private booths, a place Claire herself had never been to with him. She had not seen Daniel or whoever he was with directly, only recognized the car parked outside. But combined with the timeline from the emails Claire had already gathered, it fit perfectly into the growing picture of deception. After the call ended, Claire sat quietly at her kitchen table, staring at the growing collection of evidence spread out before her. Screenshots, photographs, a recorded voice memo, Rosa's corroborating account. Each piece added weight to a truth that was becoming impossible to deny, even for the small, hopeful part of Claire that had once wished for a different explanation. Over the following days, Claire found small opportunities to gather even more information without arousing suspicion. She noticed a calendar entry on the shared wedding planning document she and Daniel used, an entry Daniel had made weeks earlier for a supposed dentist appointment that Claire happened to know did not exist, since she had scheduled his actual dental appointments herself as a favor months ago. She cross-referenced the date with the messages she had found, and discovered it matched precisely with another meeting mentioned between Daniel and Melissa. Each new piece of evidence deepened the wound, but also strengthened Claire's resolve. She began to understand not just that a betrayal had occurred, but how long and how carefully it had been hidden, how many small lies had been constructed to protect a secret that both Daniel and Melissa had clearly decided was worth risking everything to keep. Priya continued to be her steady anchor through this process, meeting with her several times that week to review the growing collection of evidence and refine the plan for how it would eventually be revealed. They discussed logistics carefully, considering the layout of the venue, the timing of the reception, the natural moments during the evening when a microphone would already be available and guests would be gathered together in one place, listening. The toasts, Claire said one evening, the idea crystallizing fully in her mind for the first time. Everyone expects speeches during the reception. Melissa is giving one as maid of honor. My father will give one. There will be a natural pause when it would make sense for me to speak too, especially if I frame it as wanting to say something meaningful before the night is over. Priya nodded slowly, understanding the shape of the plan taking form. You could ask the coordinator to give you a moment near the end of the toasts. Something that seems planned as a heartfelt gesture from the bride. Exactly, Claire said. No one would think twice about it. It would look like part of the natural flow of the evening, right up until it isn't. They spent the rest of the evening working through the practical details, deciding how Claire would present the evidence in a way that was clear, undeniable, and impossible for Daniel or Melissa to argue away in front of 200 witnesses. Claire decided she would keep the presentation simple and calm, without shouting, without dramatic accusations that could be dismissed as an emotional overreaction. She would speak clearly, present specific facts, and let the evidence itself carry the weight of the truth. As the days continued to pass, Claire found the performance of normalcy growing both easier and harder at the same time. Easier, because she had grown accustomed to compartmentalizing her feelings, storing them away during the day, and only allowing herself to process them fully in the quiet hours of night. Harder, because every interaction with Daniel and Melissa now carried a hidden weight, every smile and casual conversation layered with the knowledge of what she now knew and they still believed remained hidden. One evening, Daniel came over to Claire's apartment with takeout, the same easy affection in his voice and manner that had first drawn Claire to him 3 years earlier. He talked about work, about a minor disagreement with a colleague over a building design, and Claire found herself listening, responding, even laughing at the appropriate moments, though inside she felt as though she were watching the scene unfold from somewhere outside her own body. I can't wait for the wedding, Daniel said at one point, reaching across the table to take her hand. I keep thinking about how happy we're going to be. Claire looked at him, at the familiar warmth in his eyes, and wondered how someone could speak words like that while simultaneously carrying the secret he carried. She wondered if he had convinced himself the deception did not matter as long as it remained hidden, if he had somehow separated the two versions of his life into compartments that allowed him to feel genuine affection for her, while also pursuing something entirely different with her sister. Me too, Claire said, forcing the words out evenly, giving nothing away. Later that night, after Daniel left, Claire sat alone in her apartment and allowed herself to cry for the first time in several days, deep, exhausting sobs that left her drained but somehow clearer afterward. She grieved, in that moment, not just for the relationship she had believed in, but for the sister she had lost long before she had learned the truth, for the version of Melissa who had once been her closest confidant and had somehow transformed into someone capable of this kind of betrayal. When the tears finally stopped, Claire wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and returned to the folder of evidence spread across her kitchen table. She reviewed everything once more, checking each detail, each timestamp, each piece of the story that was coming together with painful clarity. She was ready, she realized, in a way she had not expected to feel so soon. Ready not just to know the truth, but to make sure the truth would finally be seen by everyone who deserved to see it. 9 days remained until the wedding. Claire closed the folder, saved a final backup copy to a private cloud account only she could access, and allowed herself, finally, to sleep. The following morning, Claire woke early, before her alarm had even sounded, her mind already turning over the details of the plan that had solidified in her thoughts over the past several days. She lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, feeling the strange mixture of grief and determination that had become her constant companion since the afternoon she first stood outside that side room at the venue. She had made her decision. She was not simply going to gather proof and disappear quietly from the wedding, canceling everything through a brief phone call or a text message that spared everyone the discomfort of confrontation. She was not going to allow Daniel and Melissa the comfort of a private ending, one they could later explain away to family and friends in whatever softened version of events served them best. She was going to let the truth exist exactly where the lie had been built, in front of the very people who had been invited to celebrate something that had never been what it appeared to be. But making the decision was only the beginning. Now she needed to prepare for it, carefully and completely, without allowing a single crack to show in the days remaining before the wedding. She met with the wedding coordinator, a warm and efficient woman named Grace, later that week under the pretense of finalizing last-minute details about the reception schedule. Grace ran through the timeline with her: the ceremony, the cocktail hour, the entrance of the wedding party, dinner, and finally the toasts before the first dance and the rest of the evening's celebrations. "Is there anything you'd like to change?" Grace asked, flipping through her clipboard of notes. Claire considered her words carefully before answering. "I was actually thinking I might want to say a few words myself near the end of the toasts, something personal before the night moves forward. Would that be possible to fit into the schedule?" Grace smiled warmly, clearly charmed by the idea of a bride wanting to add her own heartfelt moment to the evening. "Of course. Brides often like to say something. We can build in a few minutes right after the maid of honor's toast before your father speaks, or we could place it at the very end, right before the first dance, so it feels like a closing moment. Whichever you prefer." Claire thought about the timing carefully. If she spoke immediately after Melissa's toast, the transition would feel jarring, and Daniel would have less time to fully settle into a false sense of security before the truth arrived. But if she waited until the very end, after all the other toasts had been given, after everyone had relaxed into the comfortable rhythm of the celebration, the impact would be far greater. The room would be at its most joyful, its most unguarded, and the shift from celebration to revelation would land with maximum clarity. "The end," Claire said, "right before the first dance, I want it to feel like a special closing moment." Grace nodded, making a note on her clipboard, completely unaware of what that closing moment would actually contain. "Perfect. I'll make sure the microphone is ready and the room is set for your speech at that point in the evening." Claire thanked her, and as she walked back to her car, she felt a strange mixture of nausea and clarity settle over her. The plan was taking shape now, moving from an abstract idea into something concrete and real, something with a specific place and time attached to it. There would be no turning back once the evening arrived, and Claire understood that fully, even as she continued moving forward with steady determination. That evening, she met with Priya again, along with a third friend, a graphic designer named Sophia who had offered to help Claire prepare a short slideshow presentation. Something that could display the key pieces of evidence clearly on a screen for everyone to see, removing any possibility that Daniel or Melissa could later claim Claire had exaggerated or misrepresented what she had found. "I want it simple," Claire told Sophia, sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open between them. "No dramatic music, no elaborate design, just the facts clearly presented so nobody can argue with what they're seeing. Sophia nodded, understanding the gravity of what Claire was asking her to help create. I can do that. Screenshots of the messages, timestamps clearly visible, maybe a simple timeline showing when things started and how long it's been going on. Straightforward and undeniable. Over the following 2 hours, the 3 women worked together, carefully selecting which pieces of evidence would be included, cropping and organizing screenshots to remove anything unnecessary while keeping the most damning details fully visible. Claire found herself grateful for her friend's steady presence throughout the process, for the way they handled the sensitive material with care and seriousness, never once questioning whether Claire's plan was justified. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia asked at one point, looking up from the laptop screen. "I mean, I support you completely, but this is going to be a lot, in front of everyone." Claire considered the question honestly before answering. "I've thought about this more carefully than almost anything else in my life. I keep coming back to the same conclusion. If I let them get away with this quietly, they'll have controlled the entire story from beginning to end. They'll decide what people know, how much sympathy they receive, how quickly everyone moves past it. I don't want that. I want the truth to belong to me, finally, after they spent months keeping it hidden from me." Sophia nodded slowly, clearly moved by the clarity and conviction in Claire's voice. "Then we'll make sure it's perfect." As the days continued to count down toward the wedding, Claire found herself navigating an increasingly delicate balancing act. She needed to appear completely normal to Daniel, to Melissa, to her parents and extended family, all while quietly finalizing the details of a plan that would upend everyone's understanding of the happy occasion they believed they were about to celebrate. There were moments when the strain nearly broke through her carefully maintained composure. During a final dress fitting, Melissa accompanied Claire to the boutique, chattering happily about the upcoming bachelorette weekend she had planned, discussing hotel reservations and spa appointments with the same enthusiasm she had shown throughout the entire engagement. Claire stood on the small pedestal in front of the mirrors, watching her sister's reflection behind her, and felt a wave of anger so intense it nearly stole her breath. "You okay?" Melissa asked, noticing Claire's sudden stillness. "You look a little pale." "Just tired," Claire said, forcing her voice to remain even. "Long week at the hospital." Melissa smiled sympathetically, completely unaware of the storm building beneath her sister's calm exterior. "Well, the bachelorette weekend will be the perfect chance to relax before everything gets really busy. I promise I've planned something you're going to love." Claire nodded, watching the seamstress adjust the hem of her wedding dress in the mirror, watching her own reflection standing in white amid the reflected glow of the boutique lights, and thought about how strange it was that the dress still looked beautiful, still fit her perfectly, even though everything it was meant to represent had already crumbled behind the scenes. That night, after returning home from the fitting, Claire allowed herself a rare moment of doubt. She sat alone in her apartment, staring at the folder of evidence she had continued refining, and wondered if there was still time to choose a different path, a quieter and less public way of ending things. She thought about how much simpler it would be to simply tell Daniel she knew everything, to end the engagement privately, to let her family learn the truth gradually and gently rather than all at once, in front of 200 witnesses. But every time she considered that alternative, she returned to the same core conviction. Daniel and Melissa had been planning to let her stand at an altar, to make promises she believed were sacred, while carrying a secret that made a mockery of everything the wedding was supposed to represent. They had discussed getting through the wedding first, dealing with the consequences of their actions only afterward, as though Claire's happiness and dignity were simply obstacles to be managed rather than something they had any responsibility to protect. She would not give them that convenience. She would not allow them to walk down the aisle of deception all the way to its comfortable conclusion, only to quietly reveal their true feelings once the wedding gifts had been opened and the guests had gone home. If they were willing to let 200 people witness a lie, then those same 200 people deserved to witness the truth as well. With that conviction firmly restored, Claire returned to her preparations with renewed focus. She reached out to a cousin, Marcus, who worked in event production and had experience with sound systems and presentation equipment. She explained, carefully and without excessive detail, that she needed help ensuring a video and slideshow presentation would run smoothly during a specific moment at the reception, framing it as a surprise element she wanted to include in her speech. Marcus agreed without hesitation, promising to arrive early on the wedding day to test the equipment and ensure everything would function exactly as planned. Claire thanked him, grateful for one more piece of the puzzle falling into place, one more person she could trust to help her carry out what she now understood was not simply an act of revenge, but an act of reclaiming the truth that had been stolen from her. 6 days remained until the wedding. Claire looked at the calendar hanging on her refrigerator, the days marked with small notes about dress fittings, final vendor payments, and rehearsal dinner details. All the ordinary preparations of a wedding that, to everyone but Claire, still appeared completely normal. She traced her finger along the remaining days, feeling the weight of what was coming, and reminded herself, once again, that she was not the villain in this story, no matter how difficult the coming days would be. She was simply a woman who had discovered the truth, and who had decided, with clear eyes and a steady heart, that the truth deserved to be seen by everyone. The bachelorette weekend arrived faster than Claire expected, 5 days before the wedding, and she found herself sitting in the back seat of a rented car, heading toward a lake house Melissa had booked for the occasion, surrounded by a handful of close friends including Priya, Rosa, and a few college friends who had remained close over the years. Melissa sat in the front passenger seat, scrolling through a playlist on her phone, occasionally turning around to share her excitement about the weekend ahead. Claire watched her sister's profile from the back seat, studying the familiar curve of her jaw, the same dimple that appeared when she smiled, features Claire had known since childhood, and felt a strange, hollow ache settle in her chest. She thought about all the years they had shared, the sisterhood that had once felt unbreakable, and wondered how much of it had been real, and how much of it Melissa had been willing to sacrifice for something she wanted more. The lake house was beautiful, surrounded by tall pine trees and overlooking calm water that caught the late afternoon sunlight in shimmering patterns. Under normal circumstances, Claire would have found the setting peaceful, restorative. Instead, she found herself performing an exhausting role for 2 full days, laughing at the appropriate moments, participating in the games and toasts her friends had organized, drinking champagne and smiling for photographs that would later be shared and treasured as memories of a joyful weekend before the wedding. Priya stayed close to her throughout the trip, offering quiet support whenever the performance became too much to bear. During a quiet moment on the second evening, while the other guests were occupied elsewhere in the house, Priya found Claire standing alone on the back deck, staring out at the darkening lake. "How are you holding up?" Priya asked softly, coming to stand beside her. "Some moments are harder than others," Claire admitted. Watching Melissa plan all of this, watching her be so thoughtful about every detail, knowing what I know, it's like living in 2 different realities at the same time. Priya put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're almost there, 5 more days." Claire nodded, drawing strength from her friend's presence. 5 more days, she repeated quietly. Later that night, after most of the guests had gone to bed, Melissa found Claire sitting alone by the fireplace in the main living room, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring into the flames. Melissa sat down beside her, curling her legs beneath her the way she had done since childhood whenever the 2 sisters shared quiet moments together. "I wanted to thank you," Melissa said softly, "for letting me be such a big part of this whole process. Planning your bachelorette weekend, being your maid of honor. It means everything to me." Claire kept her eyes on the fire, forcing herself to maintain the calm expression she had practiced for weeks now. "Of course," she said, "you're my sister." Melissa was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried an unexpected weight. "I know we haven't spent as much time together lately, just the 2 of us. I've been really busy, and I'm sorry about that. I promise, after the wedding, things will go back to normal." "I miss you." Claire felt something twist painfully in her chest at those words. The casual mention of returning to normal once the wedding had passed. Once whatever arrangement Melissa and Daniel had discussed in that side room could finally be addressed without the complication of an active engagement standing in the way. She wondered if Melissa truly believed there would be a normal to return to, if she had convinced herself that her betrayal could somehow be absorbed into the fabric of their relationship without permanently altering it. "I miss you too," Claire said quietly, and in a strange way the words were entirely true, even as everything else about the moment felt like another layer of the elaborate deception she was now determined to end. Melissa reached over and squeezed her hand, smiling warmly before standing and heading toward the stairs to bed. "Get some rest," she said. "Big week ahead." Claire remained by the fire long after her sister had gone upstairs, staring into the flickering flames, feeling the full weight of what she was carrying settle over her once again. She thought about the folder of evidence waiting on her laptop at home, about the plan taking shape for the wedding day, about the 200 guests who had no idea what was truly coming. She thought about her parents, about how devastated they would be, and steadied herself with the reminder that their devastation, however painful, belonged to Daniel and Melissa's choices, not to her decision to finally reveal them. The remaining days passed in a blur of final preparations. The rehearsal dinner arrived, held at a small Italian restaurant Daniel's parents had chosen, filled with warm toasts and laughter from both families gathered together for the first time in one place. Claire sat beside Daniel throughout the evening, his hand resting on hers beneath the table, and forced herself to smile through speeches that praised their love, their commitment, their bright future together. Daniel's mother, Barbara, stood to give a toast midway through the evening, her eyes glistening with emotion as she spoke about watching her son fall in love, about how happy he had seemed since meeting Claire, about the family they would soon build together. Claire listened to every word, aware of the painful irony threading through the sentiment, aware that the son Barbara described so lovingly had been carrying on a secret relationship with the very woman standing across the room, laughing along with everyone else at the toast. Claire's own father rose to speak as well, his voice thick with emotion as he talked about watching his daughter grow into the strong, capable woman she had become, about how proud he was of her, about how grateful he felt that she had found someone who truly deserved her. Claire fought to keep her composure through his words, gripping her napkin tightly beneath the table, reminding herself silently that within days, her father would understand the full truth, and that his pride in her would only grow once he saw the strength she was about to demonstrate. Throughout the evening, Melissa moved easily between conversations, laughing with relatives, helping coordinate small details with the restaurant staff, playing her role as maid of honor with practiced ease. Claire watched her sister interact with Daniel across the room at one point, a brief exchange near the bar that lasted only a few seconds, but carried an unmistakable familiarity in the way they stood close together, the way their eyes met just a moment too long before separating. Nobody else in the room seemed to notice, but Claire noticed everything now, every small gesture, every subtle sign of the secret bond that had grown between them over the past several months. She excused herself briefly to the restroom, splashing cool water on her wrists, staring at her own reflection in the mirror, reminding herself that the performance was almost over, that soon she would no longer need to swallow this pain silently. When she returned to the table, she found Priya watching her carefully from across the room, offering a small, reassuring nod that steadied her enough to finish the evening without breaking. 2 days before the wedding, Claire met with Marcus to finalize the technical details of the presentation. They walked through the venue together during a quiet afternoon when no other events were scheduled, testing the sound system, confirming the screen placement near the head table, running through exactly how the slideshow would be triggered during her planned speech. "Everything's ready," Marcus told her, checking the equipment one final time. "I'll be here early on the day, and I'll have everything set up and tested well before the reception begins. When you're ready to speak, just give me the signal we discussed, and I'll bring up the presentation right on cue." Claire thanked him, grateful beyond words for his willingness to help without judgment, without questioning the difficult decision she had made. As she walked back to her car that afternoon, she felt the wedding drawing closer with each passing hour, the enormity of what she was about to do settling more fully into her chest. That evening, alone in her apartment, Claire reviewed the presentation one final time, checking every screenshot, every timestamp, every detail that would need to speak clearly for itself in front of 200 witnesses. She thought about the words she would say, practicing them quietly in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her tone until it felt steady, clear, free of unnecessary anger or drama. She wanted the truth to stand on its own, without theatrics, without anything that could later be dismissed as an emotional outburst rather than a rightful reckoning. She thought about her wedding dress hanging in her closet, the dress she would wear to walk down the aisle toward a man she now understood had never truly been faithful to her, toward vows she would speak knowing full well she would not be completing the ceremony as everyone expected. She wondered, briefly, whether she should simply refuse to go through with the ceremony itself, whether canceling before the vows would be simpler than allowing the wedding to proceed all the way to the reception. But she had already thought through this decision carefully, weighing every option in the quiet hours of the preceding weeks. If she canceled the ceremony itself, many guests would leave immediately, confused and uncertain, without ever understanding the full truth of what had happened. The reception, with its gathered crowd, its natural moment for toasts and speeches, offered the only setting where she could ensure the truth reached everyone at once, clearly and completely, with the evidence displayed for all to see. She would go through with the ceremony. She would speak her vows, perhaps even mean parts of them, remembering the love she had once genuinely felt for the man standing across from her, even as she carried the knowledge of his betrayal. And then, during the reception, when the moment finally arrived for her to take the microphone, she would ensure that everyone in that room understood exactly what kind of marriage they had gathered to celebrate. One day remained. Claire looked at herself in the mirror that night, studying her own reflection with a steadiness that surprised her. She thought about the woman who had stood frozen outside that side room weeks earlier, overwhelmed with shock and disbelief. That woman had been replaced, slowly and deliberately, by someone stronger, someone who had transformed her pain into careful, clear purpose. Tomorrow, the truth would finally be seen by everyone. Claire turned off the bathroom light and went to bed, knowing that whatever exhaustion she felt tonight would soon give way to a clarity she had been waiting weeks to claim. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and clear, sunlight pouring through the curtains of the bridal suite where Claire sat, while a hairstylist carefully arranged soft curls around her face. The room buzzed with quiet activity, bridesmaids moving in and out with garment bags and makeup cases, laughter and excited chatter filling the air as the final hours before the ceremony ticked steadily forward. Claire watched the scene unfold around her as though observing it from a slight distance, present in her body but somehow removed from the moment, aware of every detail while also carrying the private knowledge of what the day would ultimately become. Melissa moved through the room with practiced efficiency, helping other bridesmaids with their dresses, checking that everyone had their bouquets ready, occasionally glancing toward Claire with warm, encouraging smiles. "You look absolutely beautiful," Melissa said, coming to stand behind Claire's chair, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Daniel is going to be speechless." Claire held her sister's gaze in the reflection for a long moment, searching for some sign of guilt, some flicker of hesitation behind Melissa's warm expression. She found nothing but genuine, practiced calm, the same performance Claire herself had been giving for weeks now. It struck her, in that moment, how skilled Melissa had become at hiding the truth, and she wondered how long her sister had been perfecting this particular kind of deception. "Thank you," Claire said simply, allowing the hairstylist to finish pinning the final curl into place. By late morning, Claire stood in her wedding dress for the first time since the final fitting, the delicate lace and silk fitting perfectly against her frame, exactly as it had been designed to. Her mother entered the room and stopped in the doorway, one hand pressed to her chest, tears immediately filling her eyes. "Oh, Claire, Linda whispered, crossing the room to embrace her daughter carefully, mindful of the dress. "You look like something out of a dream." Claire hugged her mother tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume, allowing herself, just for a moment, to feel the genuine love in the embrace, separate entirely from everything that would unfold later that evening. Whatever happened during the reception, this moment with her mother was real, untouched by Daniel and Melissa's betrayal, and Claire wanted to hold on to it fully before the day carried her forward into everything else. The ceremony began precisely on schedule, guests filling the rows of white chairs arranged beneath a canopy of flowers in the garden behind the venue. Claire stood at the top of the aisle beside her father, listening to the string quartet begin the processional music, feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes about to turn toward her as she began her walk. Walter squeezed her arm gently before they stepped forward. "Ready?" he asked softly. Claire nodded, though the word ready carried far more complicated meaning than her father could possibly understand in that moment. She was ready, in her own way, for everything the day held, even the parts her father did not yet know were coming. They walked down the aisle together, past rows of smiling faces, relatives she had known her entire life, friends who had traveled great distances to celebrate what they believed was the happiest day of her life. Claire kept her eyes forward, finding Daniel waiting at the end of the aisle in his dark suit, his expression soft with what appeared to be genuine emotion as he watched her approach. She reached the altar and took her place across from him, her father stepping back to join her mother in the front row. The officiant began the ceremony, speaking about love, commitment, the sacred bond two people were about to form in front of family and friends. Claire listened to the familiar words she had helped choose months earlier during a much happier time, and found herself experiencing a strange, layered grief, mourning not just the relationship she had believed in, but the version of this day she had once imagined for herself. When the time came for vows, Claire spoke the words she had written weeks before discovering the truth, words about trust, about partnership, about building a life together grounded in honesty. She heard herself speaking them clearly, steadily, without her voice breaking, even as the deep irony of the words settled painfully in her chest. Daniel spoke his own vows in return, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine emotion, promising faithfulness, promising to cherish her for the rest of their lives together. Claire watched his face as he spoke, searching for any sign that he understood the hollowness of his own promises, but found only the same practiced sincerity he had shown her throughout their entire relationship. She wondered, standing there in front of everyone, whether Daniel had somehow convinced himself these vows were true in the moment he spoke them, capable of compartmentalizing his betrayal so completely that he could stand before witnesses and promise faithfulness without any visible hesitation. The officiant pronounced them married, and the crowd erupted into applause as Daniel leaned forward to kiss her. Claire allowed the kiss, brief and expected, and turned to face the cheering guests as newly announced husband and wife, the weight of what she knew pressing steadily against the celebratory atmosphere surrounding her. The reception began shortly after, guests moving into the beautifully decorated hall where round tables draped in white linen surrounded a spacious dance floor. String lights twinkled overhead, and the string quartet had been replaced by a live band setting up near the head table. Claire and Daniel made their entrance to enthusiastic applause, moving through the crowd to take their seats at the head table alongside the wedding party. Dinner proceeded smoothly, conversations flowing easily among the tables, laughter and warm toasts to the newly married couple echoing throughout the hall. Claire ate very little, her stomach too tight with anticipation for the moment still hours away, though she smiled and engaged in conversation whenever guests approached the head table to offer their congratulations. She caught Marcus's eye briefly across the room at one point, and he gave her a small, subtle nod, confirming that everything remained ready and prepared for when she needed it. Priya sat several tables away, close enough to maintain eye contact with Claire throughout the evening, offering quiet reassurance whenever their gazes met. As the dinner service concluded, the coordinator, Grace, approached the microphone to announce the beginning of the evening's toasts. Daniel's best man stood first, offering a warm, humorous speech filled with stories from their friendship, drawing laughter and applause from the crowd. Claire's father followed, his voice steady despite the visible emotion in his eyes as he spoke about watching his daughter grow into the woman standing before them, about how much he had come to admire the man she had chosen to marry. Claire listened to her father's words with a heavy heart, knowing how differently he would feel about Daniel within the hour. She caught her mother dabbing at tears during the speech, moved by the sincerity in Walter's voice, and felt another wave of guilt pass through her, quickly followed by renewed determination. Her parents deserved the truth, however painful, more than they deserved a lifetime of unknowingly celebrating a fraudulent marriage. Then Melissa stood, smoothing her dress as she made her way toward the microphone, a folded piece of paper clutched in her hand containing the maid of honor speech she had spent weeks preparing. Claire watched her sister approach the front of the room, feeling her pulse quicken with anticipation of what was still to come, though outwardly she maintained the same composed expression she had worn for weeks. Melissa's speech began warmly, filled with stories from their childhood, memories of sisterhood that once felt entirely true and unblemished by anything that had happened since. She spoke about Claire's kindness, her strength, her unwavering support throughout their lives together. The guests laughed and sighed at appropriate moments, moved by the evident love between the sisters that Melissa's words conveyed. "Claire has always been the person I look up to most in this world," Melissa said, her voice growing thick with emotion. "And watching her find someone who loves her the way she deserves has been one of the greatest joys of my life." Claire sat perfectly still as her sister spoke these words, aware of the painful contradiction between what Melissa was saying and what Claire knew to be true. She glanced toward her mother, who was wiping fresh tears from her eyes, moved deeply by the beautiful sentiment of Melissa's speech, completely unaware of the deception hidden behind every word. Melissa finished her toast to warm applause, raising her glass toward Claire and Daniel with a bright, genuine-looking smile before returning to her seat at the head table. Claire met her sister's eyes briefly as she sat down, and for just a fraction of a second, she thought she saw something flicker behind Melissa's expression, something that might have been guilt, quickly hidden away beneath the practiced smile she had maintained throughout the evening. Grace approached the microphone once more, announcing that the bride had a few words she wished to share before the evening moved into its final celebrations. Claire felt her heart begin to pound steadily as she rose from her seat, smoothing the fabric of her wedding dress, aware of every eye in the room turning toward her with warm, expectant anticipation. She walked slowly toward the microphone, past tables filled with family and friends who believed they were about to witness one final touching moment in a beautiful wedding celebration. She caught Priya's eye as she passed, drawing strength from her friend's steady, encouraging gaze. She glanced briefly toward Marcus, who gave her a subtle nod, confirming the presentation was ready and waiting behind the scenes. Claire reached the microphone and turned to face the crowd, 200 faces looking back at her with warm smiles, ready to hear whatever heartfelt words the bride had prepared to close out the evening. She took a slow, steadying breath, feeling the weight of every difficult day that had led her to this exact moment, and began to speak. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Claire began, her voice clear and steady, carrying easily through the microphone across the hushed room. "Before we move into the rest of the celebration, I wanted to share something with all of you. Something important." The room settled into warm silence, guests leaning forward slightly in their seats, expecting a touching reflection on love and marriage, the kind of sentimental speech that often closed out wedding celebrations. Claire glanced briefly at Daniel, seated beside her empty chair at the head table, his expression open and encouraging, completely unprepared for what was about to unfold. "3 weeks ago," Claire continued, "I came to this very venue to drop off wedding favors, and while I was here, I overheard a conversation between my fiancé and my sister." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd, guests exchanging uncertain glances, unsure where this unexpected opening was heading. Claire kept her voice steady, refusing to let the tremor building in her chest reach her words. They were discussing an affair they have been having for several months, Claire said clearly, watching as the confusion in the room shifted rapidly into shock. They talked about needing to get through the wedding first, before deciding what to do about it. Gasps rippled through the hall, heads turning toward Daniel and Melissa, whose faces had gone pale with sudden, dawning horror. Daniel half rose from his seat, his mouth opening as though to speak, but Claire raised a hand slightly, her voice cutting cleanly through the rising murmur of the crowd. "I know this is difficult to hear," Claire said. "It was difficult for me too. But I did not want to confront this privately, and let the two of them decide how much of the truth the people who love us would ever know. You all deserve to understand exactly what has been happening, because you were all invited here to witness something that was built on a lie." She nodded subtly toward Marcus, who immediately brought the presentation screen to life behind her, displaying the first carefully selected screenshot of the email exchanges she had discovered weeks earlier. The room fell into stunned silence as guests read the messages projected clearly on the screen, undeniable evidence of the betrayal Claire had just described. "These are messages between Daniel and my sister," Claire continued, her voice remaining remarkably steady despite the storm of emotion building beneath her calm exterior. "Dated months before tonight. There are more, but I won't subject any of you to reading through every single one. I think this is more than enough to understand what has truly been happening." Melissa had gone completely still in her seat, her face drained of color, tears already spilling silently down her cheeks as the reality of exposure settled over her. Daniel stood fully now, his hands raised in a gesture of desperate explanation, though no words seemed capable of forming in his mouth as he stared at the screen displaying his own written words projected for everyone to see. "Claire," he finally managed, his voice strained and pleading, "please let me explain." "You had months to explain," Claire said, turning to look directly at him for the first time since beginning her speech. "You had every opportunity to tell me the truth before I walked down that aisle today. Instead, you chose to let 200 people witness a wedding you knew was built on a lie." The room had erupted into a low, urgent murmur, guests turning to whisper to each other in shocked disbelief, some rising slightly from their seats as though uncertain whether to intervene or remain still, and watch the scene continue to unfold. Claire's mother had risen fully from her chair, one hand pressed against her mouth in horrified realization, while her father sat frozen, his expression shifting rapidly from confusion to a dawning, furious understanding. Claire turned her attention toward Melissa, who had not moved from her seat, tears streaming freely down her face now as she stared at her hands folded in her lap. "I loved you," Claire said, her voice softening slightly, though it remained clear and audible throughout the hall. "I trusted you completely, and you let me believe you were happy for me while planning to take everything I had once this wedding was over." Melissa finally looked up, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I never meant for it to happen. I tried to stop myself." "I'm so sorry, Claire." "Sorry doesn't undo months of lying to my face," Claire replied. "Sorry doesn't undo you standing up here 20 minutes ago, giving a beautiful speech about how happy you were for me, knowing the entire time what you had been doing behind my back." The hall remained locked in stunned silence, broken only by scattered whispers and the quiet sound of Melissa's crying. Claire's grandmother, seated near the front of the room, had begun to weep quietly as well, overwhelmed by the sudden and complete unraveling of the celebration she had traveled so far to attend. Daniel attempted once more to approach the microphone, his expression desperate. "Claire, please, we can talk about this privately. This doesn't need to happen in front of everyone." "It already happened in front of everyone," Claire said firmly. "The wedding happened in front of everyone. The lie happened in front of everyone. It's only fair that the truth gets the same treatment." She reached up and slowly removed the wedding ring from her finger, holding it out toward Daniel without any dramatic flourish, simply extending her hand steadily until he reluctantly stepped forward to take it from her. "I hope you both find whatever you were looking for," Claire said quietly, her voice carrying clearly despite its softened tone. "I just wish you hadn't been willing to destroy everything I trusted in order to find it." She turned away from the microphone then, and the room seemed to hold its breath collectively as she walked away from the head table, past rows of stunned guests, many of whom rose to their feet as she passed, some reaching out to touch her arm gently, offering silent support as she made her way toward the exit. Priya met her halfway across the room, immediately wrapping an arm around her shoulders, guiding her steadily toward the door as the hall behind them dissolved into a chaos of raised voices, urgent whispers, and the sound of Melissa's continued sobbing. Claire did not look back as she walked out into the cool evening air, the sound of the reception hall's confusion fading behind her as the door closed. She stood in the parking lot for a long moment, Priya's arms still wrapped protectively around her, and allowed herself, finally, to breathe. "You did it," Priya said softly. "You actually did it." Claire nodded, feeling an overwhelming wave of emotion crash over her now that the moment had finally passed, relief and grief and exhaustion all tangled together in her chest. She had not screamed. She had not broken down in front of everyone. She had simply spoken the truth, clearly and completely, and let the weight of the evidence speak for itself. Behind them, the venue doors opened again, and Claire's mother emerged, her face streaked with tears, moving quickly toward her daughter. Linda pulled Claire into a fierce embrace, holding her tightly, whispering apologies and expressions of love and support that Claire had not realized she desperately needed to hear. "I am so proud of you," Linda whispered into her daughter's hair. "I am so proud of you." Claire's father joined them moments later, his expression a mixture of fury and heartbreak, wrapping his arms around both his wife and daughter in a protective embrace that spoke louder than any words could have in that moment. Behind them, through the venue's glass doors, Claire could see the reception hall still in chaos, guests gathering their belongings, some approaching Daniel and Melissa with expressions of shock and disappointment, others simply leaving quietly, unwilling to remain in a space that had transformed so completely from celebration into scandal. Claire stood in the parking lot, surrounded by the family and friends who had rallied around her the moment the truth had been revealed, and felt something shift inside her chest, a heavy weight finally beginning to lift after weeks of carrying it entirely alone. The wedding she had planned for months was over, shattered in front of everyone who had gathered to witness it. But for the first time in weeks, Claire felt something close to peace settling over her, the peace that came from finally releasing a truth she had carried silently for far too long. The weeks following the wedding passed in a strange, disorienting blur for Claire, each day carrying its own particular weight as she worked through the practical and emotional aftermath of what had happened. She moved out of the shared apartment she and Daniel had begun furnishing together in preparation for married life, packing her belongings into boxes with the help of Priya and Rosa, refusing to shed a single tear as she carried the final box out to her car, and drove away without looking back at the building that had once represented a future she believed in completely. She returned to her own small apartment, the one she had kept throughout the engagement, grateful now for the foresight that had left her with a place to land when everything else collapsed. The rooms felt different somehow, quieter, though Claire found a strange comfort in the familiar space, in the reminder that she had built a life for herself long before Daniel entered it, and that life remained hers to continue building, even now. The family fallout unfolded exactly as difficult as Claire had anticipated, though perhaps with more support than she had allowed herself to hope for during the weeks of careful planning. Her parents rallied around her completely, her father in particular struggling to contain his anger toward both Daniel and Melissa, spending long hours on the phone with Claire in the days following the wedding, checking on her well-being, offering to help with anything she needed as she rebuilt her life. Linda, for her part, found herself caught in a painful position between her two daughters, torn between the fierce protective love she felt for Claire and the deep confusion and heartbreak of watching her younger daughter's life unravel under the weight of public scrutiny and family disappointment. She spoke with Melissa several times in the weeks following the wedding, difficult conversations filled with tears and attempts at understanding, though she made clear to Claire that nothing excused what Melissa had done. "I don't know how to reconcile the daughter I raised with the person who did this," Linda told Claire during one particularly emotional phone call, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "I keep trying to understand, and I just can't." Claire found herself, in the weeks that followed, occupying an unexpected role as the family member who remained steadiest through the chaos, the one who had already processed her grief privately during the weeks of preparation before the wedding, while everyone else was only beginning to grapple with the shock of what had happened. She offered her parents what comfort she could, even as she continued working through her own complicated emotions surrounding the loss of both her engagement and her relationship with her sister. Melissa reached out several times in the weeks following the wedding, sending long, apologetic messages that Claire read but did not always respond to. She was not yet ready to forgive, not yet certain if forgiveness was even something she wanted to offer, and she gave herself permission, for the first time in her adult life, to simply take the time she needed without rushing toward resolution for the comfort of others. Daniel, for his part, largely disappeared from Claire's life in the immediate aftermath, communicating only through brief, practical messages regarding the logistics of returning wedding gifts and dividing shared possessions. Claire heard, through mutual friends, that his relationship with Melissa had not survived the public exposure, the weight of guilt and scandal proving too heavy for whatever connection had drawn them together in secret. She felt no satisfaction in this outcome, only a quiet, tired confirmation that the foundation of their betrayal had never been strong enough to withstand honest daylight. Priya remained a constant, steady presence throughout this period, checking in daily, sometimes simply sitting with Claire in comfortable silence when words felt insufficient for the enormity of what she was processing. Rosa and Sophia, too, continued offering their support, and Claire found herself deeply grateful for the friendships that had carried her through the most difficult chapter of her life. Friendships that had proven far more reliable than the family bond she had once considered unshakable. At work, Claire returned to her nursing duties within 2 weeks of the wedding, finding unexpected comfort in the routine and purpose of caring for her young patients. Her colleagues, many of whom had heard some version of what happened through the hospital grapevine, treated her with quiet respect and understanding, offering support without prying for unnecessary details. Priya, working alongside her in the same unit, remained a steady presence throughout each shift, a reminder that Claire was not navigating this new chapter of her life entirely alone. Slowly, over the following weeks, Claire began to notice small shifts within herself, moments of genuine laughter returning during conversations with friends, evenings spent rediscovering hobbies she had set aside during the busy months of wedding planning. She took up running again, something she had loved in her 20s before the demands of her career and relationship had gradually pushed it aside, finding a renewed sense of strength and clarity in the quiet, rhythmic movement through her neighborhood streets each morning before her shifts began. She also began seeing a therapist, a decision she made deliberately and without hesitation, recognizing that the trauma of discovering such a profound betrayal deserved professional support beyond what even her closest friends could offer. Her therapist, a calm and insightful woman named Diane, helped Claire process not only the immediate pain of Daniel and Melissa's betrayal, but also the deeper questions it had raised about trust, about her relationship with her sister throughout their childhood, about the patterns she might need to examine as she considered what she wanted from future relationships. "You did something incredibly brave," Diane told her during one of their early sessions, after Claire had recounted the full story of the wedding day reveal. "Many people in your position would have quietly absorbed the pain and moved forward without ever demanding accountability. You chose truth over comfort, even though it cost you significantly in the short term." Claire considered these words carefully, turning them over in her mind during the quiet moments of her days. She had wondered, in the immediate aftermath of the wedding, whether she had made the right choice, whether a quieter, more private ending might have spared her family some of the pain and public scrutiny that followed. But as the weeks passed, and she watched her own strength gradually returning, she began to understand that the choice she made had not been about causing pain to others, but about refusing to let her own pain remain hidden and unacknowledged. 2 months after the wedding, Claire's father invited her to dinner, just the two of them, at a quiet restaurant they had frequented together throughout her childhood. Walter had been unusually quiet during the weeks following the wedding, processing his own complicated emotions in his typically reserved manner, and Claire had sensed he needed this dinner as much as she did. "I keep thinking about that night," Walter said, once they had ordered and settled into comfortable silence for a moment. "About how calm you were up there, how clearly you spoke. I don't know if I could have handled something like that with the composure you showed." Claire smiled softly, grateful for her father's words, though she knew the calm exterior she had presented that evening had required every ounce of strength she possessed. "I had weeks to prepare," she said. "I had time to process the initial shock privately before I had to face everyone else's reaction to it." Walter nodded slowly, reaching across the table to take his daughter's hand. "I want you to know, whatever happens between you and your sister going forward, whatever decisions you make about forgiveness or distance, your mother and I support you completely. What Daniel and Melissa did was wrong. Full stop. Nothing excuses it." Claire felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, grateful beyond words for her father's steady, unwavering support. "Thank you, Dad," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." As the months continued to pass, Claire found herself slowly rebuilding a life that felt entirely her own, shaped by her own choices and priorities, rather than the expectations and plans she had built around her relationship with Daniel. She redecorated her apartment, adding small touches of color and personality that reflected who she was becoming rather than who she had been during the years of the relationship. She reconnected with old friends she had drifted from during the busy years of her engagement, rediscovering hobbies and interests she had set aside for far too long. Her relationship with Melissa remained unresolved, existing in a careful, distant limbo that neither sister seemed ready to fully address. Claire found herself, during quiet moments, still grieving the loss of the closeness they had once shared, even as she remained firm in her conviction that trust, once so completely shattered, could not be rebuilt quickly or easily, if it could be rebuilt at all. She did not close the door entirely on the possibility of eventual reconciliation, but she refused to rush toward forgiveness before she felt genuinely ready to offer it. 6 months after the wedding, Claire stood in her kitchen one Sunday morning, sunlight streaming through the window as she prepared coffee before a scheduled run with Priya. She caught her own reflection briefly in the dark surface of her phone screen, and found herself studying the woman looking back at her, someone steadier and more certain than the version of herself who had once stood frozen, outside a small side room, listening to the collapse of everything she believed her life would become. She thought about the courage it had taken to walk that difficult path, to choose truth over the easier comfort of silence, to reclaim her own story rather than allowing it to be shaped entirely by the people who had betrayed her. Whatever came next in her life, whatever new relationships or opportunities the future held, Claire understood now that she carried within her a strength she had not fully recognized before that painful chapter began. She finished her coffee, laced up her running shoes, and stepped out into the bright morning air, ready to meet whatever the day and the rest of her life still had waiting for her. A year passed, and Claire found herself standing in a different kind of season altogether, one shaped by steady healing rather than sudden crisis. She had been promoted at the hospital to a senior position overseeing a team of pediatric nurses, a role that demanded both her clinical expertise and the calm leadership she had discovered within herself during the most difficult months of her life. Her colleagues often remarked on her steady presence during emergencies, unaware of just how deeply that steadiness had been tested outside the walls of the hospital. She had also, slowly and without any particular urgency, begun dating again. A colleague from another department, a soft-spoken pediatrician named Marcus Whitfield, had asked her to coffee after months of easy, comfortable conversations in the hospital cafeteria. Claire had hesitated at first, wary of trusting so completely again after everything she had endured, but something about his patience, his willingness to let their connection grow slowly rather than rushing toward commitment, put her at ease in a way she had not expected. Their relationship developed gradually over the following months, built on long conversations, shared meals, and an unhurried trust that felt entirely different from the whirlwind romance she had once shared with Daniel. Marcus knew the full story of what had happened at her wedding, and rather than treating it as something to avoid discussing, he approached it with genuine curiosity and respect, asking thoughtful questions about how she had found the strength to face that moment so directly. "I think about it sometimes," Claire told him one evening, sitting together on her apartment balcony as the sun set over the city skyline. "Whether I would make the same choice again if I could go back, and I think I would, even knowing how hard the aftermath was." Marcus reached over and took her hand gently. "It taught you something about yourself that I don't think you would have discovered any other way. That kind of clarity, under that kind of pressure, that's rare." Claire smiled, grateful for a partner who saw her strength rather than only her pain, who understood that the woman sitting beside him had been forged, in part, by the fire of that difficult chapter, without ever reducing her entirely to that single event. Her relationship with Melissa had evolved slowly during that year as well, moving through several careful stages neither sister had rushed. In the months immediately following the wedding, the sisters had maintained almost no contact, communicating only through occasional messages during family holidays when their parents gently encouraged some minimal civility for the sake of gatherings neither wanted to disrupt further. Around the 8-month mark, Melissa had reached out again, this time requesting an in-person meeting rather than another written apology. Claire had considered the request carefully before agreeing, meeting her sister at a quiet coffee shop neither of them had frequented during their previous life together, a neutral space free from old memories. Melissa had arrived looking different somehow, thinner, more subdued, the confident ease she once carried noticeably absent from her posture. She had spoken carefully during their meeting, avoiding excuses, acknowledging fully and without qualification the depth of the betrayal she had committed against her sister. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Melissa had said, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "I don't think I've earned that yet, and I'm not sure I ever fully will. I just wanted you to know that I understand now completely how much damage I caused, not just to you and Daniel's relationship, but to us, to what we used to have." Claire had listened carefully, weighing her sister's words against the months of pain and rebuilding she had experienced since that devastating wedding day. She did not offer immediate forgiveness, unwilling to rush toward a resolution she did not yet genuinely feel. But she had allowed the conversation to continue, slowly, cautiously, opening a small door that had remained firmly closed for many months. Over the following months, the sisters met occasionally, always in careful, controlled settings, rebuilding trust in small increments rather than attempting to leap back into the closeness they had once shared without question. Claire remained honest with herself throughout this process, acknowledging that full trust might never fully return, that the relationship they eventually rebuilt, if they rebuilt one at all, would likely look different from what it had been before. Her parents, too, continued navigating their own complicated relationship with Melissa, offering cautious support as she worked through therapy of her own, addressing the choices that had led her to betray her sister so completely. Linda, in particular, struggled with the tension of loving both her daughters while refusing to minimize the harm one had caused the other, often confiding in Claire about the difficulty of holding both truths simultaneously. Daniel had moved to another city within a year of the wedding, taking a position at an architecture firm several states away, according to updates Claire occasionally heard through mutual acquaintances. She felt little beyond a distant, faded curiosity whenever his name came up in conversation, the raw anger and heartbreak she had once carried having gradually settled into something closer to indifference. She hoped, in a quiet, uncomplicated way, that he found whatever genuine happiness he had been searching for, though she felt no particular need to know the details of his life moving forward. As the 2-year anniversary of the canceled wedding approached, Claire found herself reflecting on how completely her life had transformed since that difficult period. She had moved into a larger apartment, one she had chosen and decorated entirely according to her own taste, filled with plants she had carefully nurtured, bookshelves lined with novels she had rediscovered a love for during the quiet evenings of her healing process. Her career had continued flourishing, her reputation within the hospital growing steadily as both a skilled nurse and a compassionate mentor to newer staff members joining her unit. Her relationship with Marcus had deepened significantly, moving toward the kind of steady, trustworthy partnership she had once believed she shared with Daniel, though this time built on a foundation of complete honesty from the very beginning. Marcus had met her family on several occasions, earning her father's quiet approval through his genuine warmth and evident respect for Claire, and her mother's affection through his thoughtful attention to the family's history and the careful way he navigated conversations that occasionally touched on the difficult past. Priya remained her closest friend throughout this entire journey, the bond between them strengthened rather than weakened by everything they had navigated together. They continued their weekly dinners, their morning runs, their easy laughter over shared memories both difficult and joyful, a friendship that had proven, in the end, more reliable and enduring than the family relationships Claire had once taken for granted. On a quiet evening nearly 2 years after the wedding that never truly became a marriage, Claire sat on her balcony with Marcus, watching the city lights flicker on as darkness settled over the skyline. She thought back, as she occasionally still did, to the woman who had stood frozen outside that small side room, listening to a conversation that would upend her entire understanding of trust and family. She no longer felt defined by that moment, though she recognized its lasting influence on the person she had become. She had learned, through the most painful experience of her life, that she possessed a strength and clarity she had never fully tested before, a capacity to face devastating truth without collapsing beneath its weight, to demand accountability rather than accept quiet, comfortable silence. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, noticing her thoughtful expression in the fading light. Claire smiled softly, reaching over to take his hand. "Just how far I've come," she said, "and how grateful I am for where I ended up, even though the path here was harder than I ever expected." Marcus squeezed her hand gently, understanding the full weight of her words without needing further explanation. They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars began appearing overhead, two people building something honest and steady, free from the shadows of deception that had once threatened to define Claire's entire future. Somewhere in another city, Daniel continued building his own life, carrying whatever private reckoning he had made with the choices of his past. Somewhere closer, Melissa continued her own slow, careful work toward becoming someone capable of earning back at least a fraction of the trust she had broken so completely. And here, on this quiet balcony, Claire sat surrounded by genuine love, genuine friendship, and the hard-won piece of a woman who had refused to let betrayal have the final word in her story. She had faced the truth when it would have been easier to look away. She had demanded accountability when silence would have been simpler. And in choosing that difficult path, she had discovered a version of herself stronger and more resilient than she had ever imagined possible. A woman capable of walking through devastation and emerging, eventually, into a life entirely her own, built on honesty, courage, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she deserved nothing less than the whole truth, no matter how much it cost to claim it.